it is my pleasure to introduce our amazing moderator for the night, Jenna Palacio.
Thank you. Wow, this is awesome. So we were sweet spot. We were wondering, is this going to be I'm finding it, here it is. We were wondering if this is going to be standing room only. Believe it or not, this is the fourth Tahoe Town Hall that Trip has produced, and it's my pleasure to be your moderator tonight. Wanted to touch base on a few housekeeping items. We are live streaming, as Devin mentioned, so that means my mom's watching. So I would like to encourage all of you to act as if your mom is watching as well. Respect each other, respect me, and silence your phone if you, unless you have a jazzy ringtone that you feel would contribute to this event. And I can assure you that there is no jazzy ringtone that would contribute to this event. We have a lot to cover, so again, just act like your mom's watching. So first, we're going to hear from our amazing panel that I'll introduce in just a moment here. We're going to cover some local, state, and regional topics before we open it up to you, the audience, for questions and answers from our panel. As Devin said, we have a comment card provided for you. Did everybody get one? Does everybody know where they are if they need one? Thumbs up? Cool. So please pass them to the, are we going end aisle? Yeah? Please pass them to the end of the row you're sitting in, and we'll collect them for Q&A. Folks that are sitting at the end of the aisles, just like an airline, if you are not comfortable with your seat, please let us know and we will relocate you. Thank you for flying Tahoe Regional Young Professionals. Okay, so I'm going to start at the end of I'm going to start right here and introduce our panel. It is our pleasure to welcome this fantastic array of industry, local, state, and regional representation here today. We are truly lucky to have their insight in the building. Mayor Austin Sass. Ooh. Yes. So Mayor Sass sits on the Tahoe Transportation District Board as well as the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency Board. His background includes senior management, potential positions in the ski mapping software.com, health and wellness, and advertising industries. He's also a ripping skier. Cody Bass is here. He is been appointed to serve on the city commissions for drafting regulations which were passed and proven effective. Cody founded Tahoe Wellness Cooperative right next door in January of 2009 and continues to serve as its executive director. Thank you for joining us. Oh, Lori Ajax, we are so glad you're here. In February of 2016, Governor Jerry Brown appointed Lori as the first chief of the newly appointed Bureau of Medical Cannabis Regulation for the state of California. Prior to her appointment, Chief Ajax served as Chief Deputy Director at the Department of Alcoholic Beverage Control for 22 years, including work in the Tahoe region. So we're really lucky to have you here. Thank you. Chief Brian Euler, thank you so much for joining us. Besides being our Chief of Police, Chief Euler started his career serving 3 years in the U.S. Army as military police. Then he transitioned to the police department in the city of Corpus Christi, Texas, where he rose to the ranks of commander. After this, he worked as captain at the UCSF Police Department for 3 years, and most recently, he's been our chief of police right here in South Lake Tahoe for 6 years now. So thank you for being here. Thank you for your service. Brendan, hi, how are you? Welcome back. So Brendan Ferry, he is principal planner for the El Dorado County's Community Development Agency and long-term planning team, which is responsible for helping the Board of Supervisors develop plans, policies, ordinances, and programs. So we're lucky to have, not just local representation, but also on a county and state level as well. So thank you for being here. Dr. Garrett, thank you so much. Sherellen Garrett. She is board certified in internal medicine, geriatrics, hospice, and palliative care. Dr. Gerhardt is the lead physician for the new and developing palliative care program at Barton Health In addition, she holds an appointment to the Medical Board of California as an expert reviewer. She studied cannabis medicine independently with mentors for the past 10 years and has worked in cannabis clinics for the past 2.5 years. So great insight. We look forward to hearing from you. Thank you. Great. So now that we all know each other, oh my goodness, right here in the middle. I'm so sorry. John Hoisted, thank you so much for being here via Skype from Colorado.
My pleasure.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
I can.
Excellent, excellent, good team. So John is with the Glenwood Springs-based law firm Karp, New and Hanlon. He is counsel to local planning and zoning commissions, development authorities, and community development departments in Colorado. So the law firm's local government clients have taken a variety of approaches to dealing with legal, medical, and retail marijuana. So we have a lot to learn from him as well tonight. Thank you for being here. Thank you. Great. So we have a variety of questions that we've been receiving online, and as we go through the questions that we have to get started with our panel, this is a great time to go ahead and write any questions down that pop up, pass them to the end. So, Ms. AJ, oh, thank you. Okay, great. And we just have a request, so those live streaming, if the panelists wouldn't mind when speaking, if you could stand, please. That's not too much to ask. Just so the folks watching online can see you. Okay, great. So we're going to go ahead and start with Ms. Ajax, please. We were hoping that we can kick this off with an explanation of the current law in layman's terms. What can people do right now under Proposition 64 in terms of personal use? What are the rules surrounding dispensaries and local control? And how will cannabis be taxed at the state level? Kind of the overview in layman's terms, if you don't mind.
Sure. So as most of you know, Prop 64 passed in November, so we're dealing with that, but we also still have the Medical Cannabis Regulation and Safety Act, and I think sometimes people get confused. We have two statutes on the books, one for medical and one for recreational. I don't know how many is following what's happening in Sacramento at the Capitol. There is trailer bill language, budget trailer bill language that the governor came out with to align the two systems. So part of what we're looking at from a regulatory standpoint is how we can make sure that we can align the two systems, because otherwise it gets very confusing if you have different rules for medical versus adult use. So that's what we've been working on, is that transition, but a lot of what we've been working on is obviously the first state regulatory system for both medical and adult use cannabis. So what you can do right now, well, like Cody's doing, he has a medical dispensary, so that is still allowable as long as you have a permit, license, or other authorization from the city or county. And he can continue to operate, or anybody that's in compliance with the city or county, until the state makes a final decision on the application. And since we're not taking applications yet, then that can happen until we make that final decision. For adult use, there shouldn't be anybody doing adult use. The state has to give a license for that. And so that will come, and I probably don't have to tell you this. What's our statutory mandate to start issuing licenses? You guys could probably tell me. Gosh, you guys got to say it all at once. Come on now. You're supposed to be excited about this, by the way. January 1st, 2018, we have to start issuing licenses. And so that's our statutory mandate under Proposition 64. So what we've been doing, obviously when I came on, there was just the Medical Cannabis Regulation and Safety Act. When Prop 64 passed, that expanded the Bureau's role along with the other two licensing authorities. So the Bureau acts as the lead agency. We also are working with Public Health, who's issuing manufacturer's license, and Food and Agriculture that are issuing the cultivation licenses. So we're working together to develop our regulations. And probably most of you know we've been talking about our regulations, and what that's going to spell out is right now, like somebody like Cody is operating under how the city has told them the rules that he has to follow. the state is now going to come out with their rules on what the floor will be for the entire state. So we're going to have our rules on what a dispensary can do, what a distributor can do, a cultivator, and a city or county will have to follow those along with everybody up and down the state. And then any city or county can be more restrictive. So we're basically the baseline that everybody has to follow. So I'm happy to tell you our regulations will be out at the end of this month. So how many of you are on our listserv? If you go on our website, you can sign up for email notifications. As soon as that regulation text is available, we really do want people to read it and comment. So how many are familiar with the California rulemaking process? Yeah, I know. California is a pretty interesting state. Unlike some of the other states, Oregon and Washington, we have a pretty robust rulemaking. So when we propose regulations at the end of the month, that kicks off a 45-day comment period. So nothing's final in our regulations. So we are really looking for people to read them and comment, especially people that are in the industry. And even though we've done a ton of outreach, we've done so much outreach up and down the state to try to learn what's going on now, to try to learn the business, but we also have to balance that with good public safety. So we do want to hear from you. If there's something in our regulations that doesn't make sense, we want those comments. So there will be 45 days for people to comment. We have to respond to every comment, and then we'll make changes accordingly. Just so you know, these are only for medical regulations. They're not for adult use, but most of what we're putting out there will be used also for the adult use. For the adult use regulations, those probably won't be out till probably sometime in early fall, and the reason is because right now there's a lot of changes with the budget trailer bill, and since we don't know what those changes are, we can't have our regulations out. So right now it's just for medical, and we really would like to see you comment on that.
Wonderful, thank you. Just so for the audience's record, can we repeat the website, that listserv?
Yeah, it's www.bmcr.ca.gov. We still have our name, the Bureau of Medical Cannabis Regulation, but if you look at the budget trailer bill, our name will change to Bureau of Cannabis Control, but we're still under BMCR, so bmcr.ca.gov. And I think you asked about taxes. I know. I don't like talking about taxes. None of you probably like me to talk about taxes either. But you know, there's the 15% excise tax, there's a cultivator's tax, and then there's going to be the retailer tax. Also, the locals can also impose a tax. So a lot of taxes, and by the way, that's not something the Bureau can change. That is something that's there. What we're looking for, though, is making sure that when we come up with our licensing fees, we are keeping in mind we're not trying to make them so high that nobody can afford them. We at the Bureau for our licensing can only charge what it's going to cost us to administer the program. So we're looking at that. As all of you know, our responsibility changes every day. So we're trying to figure that out and make sure we keep those prices down.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Oh, all right. Great, thank you. Dr. Gerhardt, we'd like to follow up. In your medical opinion, how do you feel Prop 64 will affect community health and safe access to medical cannabis? And what has the medical community identified as the effects, both positive and negative, of using cannabis?
It's a very, very broad question.
We're just covering some overview before.
So, and I'm going to refer to notes because there's some important talking points here that I think we need to be sure and get into the conversation regardless of how they come about. There is a difference between using cannabis for medicinal use and recreational use, and those purposes are important to understand. But having said that, responsible recreation use with consciousness around desired outcomes and consequences and personal effects can be therapeutic. And I'm sure that's a controversial statement. So I'm going to leave that on the table for a minute. The drugs are not necessarily the problem. Drugs are dangerous, but it's inappropriate use of drugs and lack of education and guidance that really get us in trouble. And cannabis itself is an herbal compound. In its natural state, it is not a pharmaceutical, and it can't be treated exactly as a pharmaceutical. It needs to be looked at in the way and the nature that it is formed and how it is used and how it impacts our body and our biology. And that is complicated, and it desires a group of people to look at it and help expand on how it can be presented to the community and how we can learn how to use it appropriately and consciously without making bad judgments and mistakes. I think I was invited to talk here not only to speak to the importance of whether medical cannabis should be used or looked at, but also to talk about who shouldn't be using it and things that we need to be conscious about when we talk about public safety and harm. So I'm going to kind of weave some of that into the question. I'll get to the answer, but it's going to come about in just a second. We have a system in our body that responds to the ingredients in cannabis very specifically. And that system has evolved in every species from invertebrates to mammals. The only exception to that is insects. And there is a reason why that system exists. And I can't tell you that it's because it's meant to accept cannabis, but that's an awfully interesting coincidence, and it deserves study. And we have not been able to do as much scientific study on cannabis as we'd like to in the United States because of the way cannabis is currently classified. Okay? Thank you. So, yeah, so I think it deserves to be looked at, and I think we deserve the opportunity to actually do some robust study. Having said that, there are approximately 50 to 75,000 papers on cannabis use. Some of them are very robust and have been produced in other countries that have an opportunity to study cannabis deeply, and some of them are less robust. And I think what we need to do is spend the energy to really look at the data and really hone it in and figure out what we can do with cannabis, because there are some promising, very promising medicinal applications for cannabis. And I in my line of work, I get to see that. Now, the flip side of that is we don't want our 12-year-olds smoking cannabis every day. That is not medical safety. That's what we call public harm. And so I am not advocating for willy-nilly use of cannabis. I'm advocating for responsible, good, informed cannabis use and education. There are concerns with certain delivery systems of cannabis, and there's a difference between using different types of delivery methods for cannabis. There's, smokable cannabis. There's concentrates now that are extremely potent. And we need to learn how to use those properly, but they have wonderful medical applications. So I think this is a complicated question, and it deserves conversations just like this so we can explore it in more detail.
Perfect.
Good
Great.
start?
And I'm sure you'll have some questions from our audience in this regard as well. Thank you. That's great. So, Mr. Bass, we wanted to check in with you on small business level, as Ms. Ajax touched on the on Proposition 64 on both the recreational and medical side. So feel free to self-limit your response to this. But what do you see? How will Prop 64 affect the medicinal cannabis industry? And do you see Proposition 64 as an opportunity for small businesses on the recreational side?
So yeah, absolutely. I think Lori kind of laid out a little bit in the law around how there is two different frameworks. There is two different initiatives that passed, one in 1996 and one just last year in 2016. So based on that, there's a lot of difference in the two, and there will be a difference, and there will be an advantage of holding a medical card because there is a lower tax rate. There won't be sales tax applied to a medical patient's transaction, and that's somewhat of the complications coming forward on how to merge the systems together. However, I think the trailer bill that is in the budget with Jerry Brown that he put out last week, there's a lot of great changes, and it gives me a lot of great hope with the Bureau and with the legislature and the governor and the things that are happening in Sacramento. I really believe are to preserve a cottage and craft industry, knowing that there's going to be huge conglomerates and huge entities that already exist. But I really believe that they have made the moves just in the last couple of weeks. There's been major shifts around the way that our supply chain is going to work, around the ability to have cross-licensure so that small businesses and small farms can actually be able to make their own edibles and be able to extract their own medicine. Some of these complications, when the law was passed, were really not spelled out. So to say, I think that we're really moving in a good direction as far as that goes. With the opportunity side of things, I think there is a massive amount of opportunity, and I know there is. Right now, we have probably somewhere close to maybe 1 million patients that are registered with a recommendation throughout the state. And when we open this up to a recreational market, we're the largest tourism state in the United States of America. So if you can just think about, all the people that come here to visit Tahoe, or they come to San Francisco to come, that they can't come to a medical dispensary. So the economic side of it is massive, and there's a huge, real opportunity for communities and for entrepreneurs and for families to really take hold of these opportunities. But we have to come together as a community. We've got to get our municipalities to come together and see a sensible way forward. And I think this is a great opportunity to do that. What I also see that is so great about Prop 64 coming around and legalization as a whole is that it really starts to create the side that there is the access to recreational cannabis as you would use it in more of a therapeutic way, but it also starts to open the door for medicine to start to really embrace cannabis. And as Sherilyn said, we have not seen that day. We have not seen medicine and science really take a look at the real possibilities of applying this. And when we can have science take and break down exactly the terpene profile and cannabinoid profile that makes you hungry and want to eat, and Sherilyn can deliver that in the hospital, that is going to be a day that changes a lot. And so that is what is so exciting about having somewhat of a split, is because what's here at Tahoe Wellness and has been here for 8.5 years, it really is something that's great. And I believe that the more that medical embraces it, this will kind of be the recreational side of the platform. However, we will always serve patients, and we will always be there from the founding of it. What else, and I'll close up with this, is going to be so indifferent in the emerging of the two, was in 1996 when we passed Proposition 215. None of the municipalities, including the state, were even willing to recognize the law, and it took years on end just to get Berkeley in the beginning, to recognize the first dispensary. And we didn't open Tahoe Wellness into 2009, and it took a ton of working with the city and in great ways. And we've come together. We've tried to really get residential grow permits to happen, and we've really done a lot of the work. Well, with recreational emerging, it's going to be a completely different path. With Lori's bureau actually being able to kind of vet and make sure that the people that are entering are up to par and everything is good. Because as we dealt with locally here in 2012, we had some very bad actors, but we wrote an ordinance and it was effective in getting those bad actors out of town. And so I really look forward to the emerging of the recreational industry.
Excellent, thank you. That actually, this parlays perfectly into our question for Mr. Hoistad. John, what are the experiences you've had with recreational cannabis implementation at a local level in Colorado? I mean, obviously Lake Tahoe is a tourism recreation destination. What struggles and benefits are you seeing out there in Colorado?
Well, the answer to that is varied. Here on the western slope of Colorado, we are adjacent to Aspen, which may not be terribly different recreationally from Tahoe. We also have a diverse group of small and rural jurisdictions that we represent. Each of these has taken their own approach to recreational marijuana, from completely banning the use of the drug or any permitting of recreational marijuana businesses within their municipal boundaries, to opening it up as wide as they possibly can to try to generate that tax revenue that can be very difficult to come by in resource-dependent environments. Over the last 2 years, we have representing small municipalities totaling about 20,000 people, been sued 3 times We have had 2 referendum petitions, 2 recall petitions for local government officials, and a slew of other legal challenges to our own voter-approved regulatory regimens. So the challenges there have been varied. And extending beyond that to a more regional view, when we have a patchwork of local regulations, as you will have in California, you get competition among the populations to either open the doors or close the doors to this industry. Some of our local governments are vehemently opposed to any recreational marijuana. Others see it as a boon for their economies. And so, because you cannot fully close the door to the prevalence of recreational marijuana being bought in other communities, entering your own, the police regulation has become an issue as well. Those struggles are persistent, and are being worked out over time as we explore what the right balance is. What I am personally more concerned about is the latent effects that this is having on our population, specifically the youth population. We hear anecdotal evidence from school districts about the higher levels of truancy and the persistence of marijuana in counseling sessions. The availability of marijuana at home, whether too much of it, or in some cases, the view that there is simply not enough of it to go around. Oddly enough, that is something that comes up. And the use of marijuana by children in our towns as young as 6 years old already. What that will do to a population that is aging as brains are still developing, beyond the age of 20, as other panelists can comment on, is something that Colorado is going to have to deal with, and California as well.
Great. Wow. How about that? So this seems like a great time to check in with our county representative here, Mr. Ferry. So with the passing of Proposition 64, we have different jurisdictions here in South Lake Tahoe where this can and cannot be implemented. If passed, how and where will dispensaries be zoned? And what are the land use implications? If the city of South Lake Tahoe doesn't approve storefront recreational marijuana and El Dorado County does, could somebody open a storefront in Myers? Good luck.
Thanks. Okay,
Please
thank
come
you.
back to another panel.
Yes. Excuse me, I have to leave. No. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming. So one key distinction, I am discussing the unincorporated portion of El Dorado and not the city. So everyone realizes, right, we're in the city of South Lake Tahoe. That is within El Dorado County, but it is an incorporated city. And we have separate governing bodies and separate rules and regulations. And I think that's just very fundamentally important here for everyone to understand. So when I'm speaking, I'm not going to be talking about rules in the city here. I'll be talking about the unincorporated portion of our county. Your representative is Sue Novosel in District 5. And our board actually meets down in the great city of Placerville. So that is one disadvantage of our local community here is oftentimes if you want to get in front of your elected official, although you can go meet with her at her office at any time, you have to drive down the hill to go to a board meeting, to go to an ad hoc committee meeting, because the county actually does have an ad hoc committee on medical marijuana, and 2 of our board members sit on that committee. Those meetings happen approximately quarterly. They are publicly noticed, and I would encourage any of you that are interested in county politics, and especially this issue, to participate in those meetings. Also come down and talk to our board, meet with Supervisor Novosel, and let her know your thoughts on this issue. I think some things I'm going to tell you may frustrate you because El Dorado County is still in, this has very recently passed, just in November. We're in kind of our wayfinding stage of this process currently. We do have 2 ordinances that deal with medical marijuana. They're ordinances 4999 and 5000. They're available on our website. One of them actually bans dispensaries in El Dorado County. It bans medical dispensaries. There are 2 open dispensaries still on the West Slope, I think one in Cameron Park, one in Diamond Springs, that are grandfathered in. So those do exist. New ones are not allowed. That's currently the rules in El Dorado County. Our second ordinance, Ordinance 5000, actually allows residential growing of medical marijuana on your property. And there's very clear rules on what you need to do in order to comply with that rule. That ordinance is there's a certain amount of square footage that's allowed. There's not a number of plants. It's an area. There's screening requirements, odor, there's setbacks from schools and youth facilities, and any number of other kind of standard provisions that you would see in other sort of really boring land use zoning type laws. What I'm going to tell you is not nearly as sexy as the rest of the panelists, so bear with me. So we're reaching out to other counties. We're receiving a presentation on May 9th from a state consulting firm called HDL that, as I understand, works in the field of marijuana and is going to advise our board on things like civil penalties and also revenue generation from what this possibly could provide our county. And so that will be an open hearing at our board. I'd recommend anyone to view that. You can, just so you know, look on our website and watch our board meetings live. So that could be a good way to chime in right from your computer or your phone. So I think our county is looking at other counties. We really want to, investigate this issue thoroughly and vet it thoroughly. And it's possible there could be a storefront dispensary in Myers. I'm not here to say that will never happen. I don't know. It depends on what our board wants to do. Our board is 5 supervisors, and they are the ones that make the decision for our county based on our recommendations. But the key part of that is they work for you and me. So get involved and let them know what you feel about this issue.
No, thank you very much. So, Mr. Sass, we wanted to follow up with you on local level. We're talking about a lot of different levels of implementation here, but if passed, how and where should the dispensaries be zoned? I mean, are we even at that point? What are the implications of taxation at a local level? Where would the tax money go? And all of that good stuff. Mr. Mayor.
So the answer to all of that is TBD.
Yeah.
To let you know where council is on this, we had a retreat in the beginning of the year, and we discussed broadly the topic of cannabis. And what we mutually agreed to is that we needed to get smarter about it. And so towards that end, the city attorney went to a conference down in Anaheim. He spent all day at an educational conference learning about what the law means, what the implications may be, the business side of it. On May 18th, Councilmember Brooke Lane and myself are going down to Sacramento for a public policy meeting. It's another 8-hour meeting where they're going to go over all the topics related to sale of cannabis, cultivation of cannabis, everything you can imagine about it. And then individual council members will also be reaching out to other people to try to get smarter about the topic. I'm going to Colorado for personal reasons in the beginning of May. And while there, I spoke with the mayor of Breckenridge, and Breckenridge has a dispensary in the middle of town. And so I'll be meeting with him and talking about everything from how much revenue you are generating, what's the effect on your town, how do your locals feel about it, how do your tourists feel about it. And I think that's going to be a great opportunity for the city, because Breckenridge, for those of you that know Colorado, it's a ski town just like Tahoe is, and high altitude and lots of tourists coming in, so I think we can get smarter. So as far as council goes, we haven't sat down and had any in-depth conversations yet about the topic. because we feel we need to get smarter. And I think you heard today from Lori that the state is working on the regulations right now, and the fact that they're not even coming out with the recreational ones until September tells you that we should not be in any rush to put something into place without understanding the regulations. The things that we as a council need to look at are retail sales of recreational and medicinal, commercial grows within the city limits, testing laboratories within the city limits, edible production within the city limits, enforcement, administration, where do they go, how many should there be, what should the advertising be related to it. So there's a whole bunch of things that we need to discuss and develop policies about, and we look forward to having workshops with the public. We look forward to getting informed, and at the point that we feel that we have enough information, we will eventually get to a point where we have to decide, are we going to allow any of those different things to happen within the city limits? If so, getting back to the tax question, the state, as Lori said, will tax cannabis sales at 15%. None of that money goes to the city. Unless you allow legal sales within your city limits, then you get a small percentage for education that would go to the school system. If we decide to allow sales within the city, or grow within the city, or production of edibles, or testing, and we decide that we're going to tax it in line with what other cities in Northern California have done, it looks like the tax rate right now is 10 to 15% that they've put in place. Different cities have earmarked that in different ways, whether it goes to enforcement, whether it goes to education, whether it goes to roads, whatever it may go to, that's up to the individual municipality or to the county. And so that's another thing we'll need to decide. If we do decide that it should be taxed, we still have to go to the voters. And if we go to the voters and we say we want to put this money into the general fund and not earmark it, it requires 50% plus one vote for it to pass. If we decide that we're going to earmark that money for a specific purpose, for example, if we said we're going to allow retail sales within the city and all the money would go to enforcement and administration of the retail sales, and we also wanted to use that money to pay for a drug task force to make up for the disappearance of the sled net, and let's say we wanted to focus on opioids and heroin, we could decide to do that. But none of this has been decided by council because we haven't discussed it. And so the thing with the taxation is we will be going to the voters one way or the other if it's going to be allowed within the city. I really can't personally envision a scenario where we would decide to take this up and not have the funds for the enforcement and the administration. And by the way, on the revenue, everybody thinks there's a big potload of money at the end of the rainbow. My stepson works in the financial department in Loveland, Colorado, and so he has access to a lot of numbers from fellow cities. Some cities are making a fortune. Some cities aren't making anywhere near what they thought they were going to make. And the state doesn't tell you, if you have 22,000 people living in your city, you can expect to generate $1 million or $2 million or $3 million or $100,000 in tax revenue. So we don't really know what this is going to end up looking like when it's all done, but we are in the process of trying to figure it out.
Ongoing conversation. And Chief Euler, we have a question for you as well before we open it up to audience Q&A here. Recently, Douglas County came out saying that they will not be allowing recreational sale of cannabis in there, and we share a state line here. So with Douglas County banning commercial sales of cannabis, what are the implications if cannabis is legal in South Lake Tahoe?
And I thought you were going to ask me the tax question.
Well, I have a follow-up for you, sir.
Good. Well, the implications are that folks that are from outside of the area would come to South Lake Tahoe to purchase their recreational marijuana if Tahoe allowed it and allowed it to be legal. Do you want to ask me the follow-up question?
Yeah, I'm just, again, finding that sweet spot here. We were wondering, with this taxation, Mayor Sass, you mentioned an additional 10 to 15% on top of the statewide 25%. So, Chief Euler, with this taxation, could excessive taxation create a black market?
Well, it certainly has created a black market in Colorado. There are, as an example, one headline back in January 2017 read, "Taxes and red tape keep Colorado's marijuana black market profitable." And the issue for South Lake Tahoe, and I'd like to build on a little bit about what our mayor described, is that South Lake Tahoe already has a population of people who have recommendations from doctors. The way that the tax structure is set up by the state is that the state will get 15% of recreational marijuana sales. That money does not stay in the local community as the mayor just described. But the law also does not allow for that additional taxation that the council may approve if it was moving in that direction. That additional taxation would not stay in the local community if the purchaser of that marijuana is doing so with a recommendation for medical reasons. The law specifically does not allow that money to stay in the local community. So there's an anti-incentive. There's an anti-incentive for people to use recreational marijuana. It would be much more cost effective if you were a regular recreational marijuana user to spend $200, go see a doctor, get your card, and save a lot of money over the course of the year of your recommendation, avoiding the taxes that would stay local. So I think that may have been some of the problems with some of the Colorado towns, but it certainly is an anti-incentive to taxation that would result in benefits to the local community. The price difference between what would be black market marijuana and recreational commercially available marijuana at 30% would be significant. And as it has been the case in Colorado, and I'm sure a fellow panelist can talk a little bit more about this if it warrants follow-up, there has been an extensive black market issue in Colorado.
Great. Actually, I've seen some arching eyebrows there on the screen, and I just want to give Mr. Hoystead an opportunity to chime in on the Colorado black market. Anything to report there, sir?
While there is certainly a prevalent black market for marijuana in Colorado, and the fingers are pointed to the 15% state excise tax, as well as the local taxes that can, in some cases, be quite high. The market itself, I think, is overblown, is overstated. The willingness of the population, generally speaking, to purchase marijuana through legal channels has, at least in the municipalities that we represent, been very high. They've been more than willing to pay the extra taxes, and in fact, just last November, we passed an additional 10% tax in a town of about 10,000 people, rather 5% on transfers, 5% on final sales. And that measure was supported in large part by the industry itself. We had the major industry player here go and support the measure before council and expressed the willingness of his customers to pay that. There is still in Colorado, like California, the availability of what we call a red card that will exempt you from certain taxes because you are a medical patient. My understanding was actually that Washington has had a much larger issue with their black market, though I can't speak too much to that. It will be an issue that will likely be tampered down over time as people start to see the benefit of going through proper legal channels rather than buying it out of the back of somebody's car or an unsavory place. A lot of the revenue that we see generated does come from tourists, people who maybe don't even care to partake in recreational marijuana, kind of still want to go into a store and say that they bought some. I know it sounds funny, but we have 7 shops here in our town of 10,000 people, and we hear that kind of thing all the time. So depending on how local enforcement goes, And yes, I think depending on how high you set local taxes, there may be space for a black market. But I would hesitate to say that taxation is the sole reason for the creation of that black market, or rather, that market being sustained after legal recreational marijuana is on the books.
Great. Excellent. Okay, so without further ado, we are going to open this up to you. Just in the interest of time, this event does go until 7:30. So we are going to try to answer as many of your questions as possible. If we do not get to your questions, please don't worry. We will figure out a way to, if the panel is agreeable to this, to pose the questions to our panel electronically and put your answers up on our blog, if that's suitable. And just in the sake of time, let's try to maybe self-manage our answers to just a few moments if we can, just so we can answer as many while our community members are here. So we'll tee it off with a question that we received online. How can the city prevent a legal company in compliance with state regulation from opening in the city? The city has made it clear in the past that when a business comes to a town, that there are several already, and there's nothing that they can do about it to prevent a legal and legitimate business like Bevmo or massage parlors from opening in Tahoe. Anyone. This is not directed to anyone. So the question is, how can the city prevent a legal company that's in state compliance with state regulation from operating in the city?
The state has given the ability for cities to decide whether or not they want to allow retail sales of medicinal and or recreational, or allow commercial grows or anything else associated with the industry. So it's up to the municipality to decide. So the state has given the ability to the city to do that.
All right. Good. Let's see here. And then we'll take another online, and then I'll take some cards once we answer this. Let's see here. How will the local police deal with changes in federal policy if cannabis is legal in South Lake Tahoe, but the feds crack down?
Well,
I added that extra.
You may be surprised your police chief will support the feds and help with the crackdown. But in all reality, I mean, we recognize the law. We recognize the law that has been passed by the state. There's no intent on us to do any sweeping operations geared towards marijuana, and I have not heard of any kind of impetus on the federal government side to come in or swoop in and do anything with marijuana in California. So I don't think that that's really something we're going to end up facing.
Thank you.
And could I follow up just real quick to that? There is a bill right now in the Assembly, Bill AB 1578, which is going to be, I believe it just passed one of the commissions, and it's going to instruct municipalities in the state of California to not work with the feds if there is any interference to state legal and licensed cannabis dispensaries. So you should support and call your Assembly member and support AB 1578.
Yes, civic engagement. And this is another great resource, a website to post on our blog as well as we follow up on these questions. So let's see, we have a question from the audience, Dr. Gerhardt. If we want to follow up on the research element that you mentioned, will Proposition 64 allow the medical community access to cannabis for proper research on the benefits of cannabis?
Ms. Ajax, you may have to help me a little bit, because I've read through Prop 64. Have any of you attempted that? It's quite imposing. There is money set aside for many parts of the project. There's money set aside for treatment. I believe there's money set aside for in hopes of research. The problem is, in order to do organized, board-certified, very substantive research in the United States on a substance that has potential psychogenic properties, it has to be rescheduled from a Class 1 or Schedule 1 drug under the narcotic scheduling so that it can actually be accessed and used for study. And so the first step for that to happen in the United States is that it has to be changed from a classification of a Schedule I drug down to a Schedule II or III drug to be studied effectively. And so, historically, as many of you probably know, because some of you have done just as much research as I have, every presidential commission since Nixon has recommended legalization of small amounts of cannabis and has advocated for research, with the exception of the Bush administration. So multiple thought leaders across the decades have said that we should reschedule this drug and we should look at it in depth. There is a complex set of layers of politics that envelops that right now, and that's going to have to be unpacked very carefully and delicately. And I wish I could say I'm encouraged by our federal government right now, but I'm not sure when that will happen. But I also agree with our police chief. I don't think the feds are going to be tackling us anytime soon on this topic. So I think since California is a thought leader in this area and is really doing work on it, and there are some studies happening, and there are studies happening abroad, Israel, Spain, Europe, they are doing very robust studies in use of cannabis, and we're going to be the beneficiaries of that research. But it would really behoove us to do that research in the United States, because those research dollars and that development and innovation in the industry in medicinal cannabis could bring wonderful recognition from a medical standpoint to our country, could help our patients, and could also bring medicinal revenues to our country. So there's a lot of things to think about in regards to that.
Thank you. Here's a question that was submitted online today, just before the event. The question is, and I believe this would maybe be for you, Chief Uhler, or maybe the panel in general. If I'm a sober driver involved in a vehicular accident and I suspect the other driver involved in the accident is under the influence of cannabis, what steps can I take to determine if the other driver is impaired? And then what steps are being taken locally to educate users about the dangers of driving under the influence?
First, if you're involved in an accident and you would suspect the other driver to be under the influence of anything, whether it's alcohol or cannabis or other drugs, it would be to call the police. We have officers who routinely arrest people for being under the influence and driving motor vehicles. That said, Proposition 64 does have some of the funds set aside for CHP to define or develop methods for police officers to use in determining whether or not somebody's under the influence of marijuana. And part of the medical research that my fellow panel member mentioned includes ways for police to figure out whether or not somebody's under the influence of marijuana and whether they're too high or not high enough, or high, below a threshold.
Okay.
Either way.
If
yeah.
I may.
But there's methods underway trying to figure it out. But the point here is even police officers don't have ways of determining whether or not somebody is intoxicated to the point where they are dangerous on the road.
Understood. Ms. Ajax, do you want to chime in on the state level? How is the state looking into enforcing high while driving?
So right now, the Bureau is overseeing a research study that the University of California at San Diego is conducting on folks. They're having them actually do a study where they're consuming cannabis, and then they're studying how it affects their motor skills. So once they consume the cannabis, they're going to a simulator, and they're working with CHP to develop those, what are some better methods than sometimes what we use to determine alcohol impairment doesn't work the same way with cannabis. So that's going on right now. It's a 3-year study. It started last year. They did get cannabis to do this research study. It took them almost 8 months to get that cannabis, because they have to got to get tremendous approval, like you said, through the federal government, the DEA, just to get cannabis delivered to the university in order to conduct that study. And then at that point, most of it has a THC level that averages 8 to 15%. So it's probably not even what we've been told. It's not even good cannabis. So I don't know. So there does need, so that research is going, so that is a start. I think it is a good start, but there needs to be more, and I think part of the problem is we've got to start sooner than later because these studies do take time, and we really need those answers. So I think from the state point of view, we've got to look at, there's a lot of private companies in California that want to do this research. It's just how can they legally have that cannabis in order to do that research. So I think we're exploring, and by the way, not for January 1st, 2018, because we've got our hands full, but maybe the next year, can we create a license that will allow people to have small amounts of cannabis in order to conduct research and development?
Thank you. And Dr. Gerhardt?
Yeah, just briefly, cannabis is complicated. It's not like testing for an opiate or alcohol. Those are very straightforward scientific tests, and we can correlate what we find in the blood or in the urine or in body fluids with a dosing that degrades at a very predictable level. Cannabis is a very complicated compound that has anywhere between 80 and 120 ingredients depending on the plant or the product. And the degradation of those products depends on the delivery system. And having cannabinoids in your system does not mean that they're active or that you're intoxicated. So this is a very complicated issue. They are attempting to develop studies and tests that can test active cannabinoid metabolites, but we're far from being there. So this is a complicated topic that deserves a lot of study.
Understood. This is a panel we'll take from an online question that was submitted today, and I believe this could chime in here, panel. With 65% of the city of South Lake Tahoe voters voting in favor of Proposition 64 in the 2016 election, will the city listen to the community and work to implement recreational cannabis to the full extent of the law by allowing retail sales? And the follow-up is, if anyone could get cannabis legally on the black market, why wouldn't the city or county embrace recreational retail sales? Mr.
The city is aware that 65% of the voters within the city limits voted for Prop 64. And as I mentioned earlier, it's very complicated because there's a lot of components to what you legalize, how you legalize it, where you legalize it. And that's why you've got 4 out of 5 council members here today listening to what the audience has to say. That's why we're going on these educational trips and talking to other people to figure out what it is that we need to be aware of before we put something in place. Saying that it should be legalized is easy. Saying how many stores there should be is harder. Where they should be is even harder than that. Should they be advertising in town? Should they be, the state says retail stores can't be within a certain distance of the school system. Well, where do we want them in town if we allow them? How many should we have? Should we have 20? Do you want to see green crosses going up and down Highway 50? I don't know. But those are all the things that we need to go through the discovery process on. So we are aware of what the voters voted on, and unfortunately the state left it to the municipalities to figure out how to put it in place, and it's not helping us that the state hasn't finished all the regulations yet. And it's also kind of interesting that, the law passed because the voters wanted it to pass. But as the chief just said, and as the doctor just said, how do you measure impairment? So in our community, would you like to have 100 people driving down Highway 50 high, and how do we know if they should be driving or shouldn't be driving? The police can't even tell you that right now, and the medical industry can't tell you that right now. So there's a lot that has to be looked at. There's a lot that has to be discussed. But again, you've got 4 out of 5 council members here. We are listening to what the audience has to say. And if any of you have the answers to those questions, we're all ears.
I'd like to add a little bit to that. Just because 65% of the population in South Lake Tahoe voted for AUMA, many of those people might have voted for it recognizing that it allows for local control. Some people may have voted yes, thinking that our local government will control it, won't allow the storefronts. There's complicated factors that have to be considered, as the mayor just described. Things like, does it have an effect on our recreational tourism industry? Does it make families feel uncomfortable when you go to a recreational event with your young family members? Are there other things that could be impacted in the local community? Just because people supported Proposition 64 doesn't necessarily mean that they support storefronts on our major corridors. The other issue is that those that support marijuana, recreational marijuana, certainly need to recognize that it is, there's so many unknowns out there. There's a risk to our community that, and as the doctor just recently talked about, or some of our fellow colleagues, there's so many unknowns. I would propose to you that it's dangerous and it's a risk to the community to step into it foolhardy. Wait until some of these things work themselves out in other communities.
Oh, this is actually a great follow-up from Mr. Ferry. Brendan, will the city's decision on Proposition 64 influence the county's actions?
That's a great question. I don't know if I can answer that. I mean, we have a lot of communication with the city and a strong relationship, and I think certainly that we should, try to make collective decisions that make sense regionally. I will say that, though, that the primary, the large population base of the county is located out of the Tahoe Basin. And so you're going to hear our council members, 4 out of 5 of them, represent communities that are not in Lake Tahoe. And so that's a key distinguishing factor for us is that's where the population base is for our board.
All right.
Does that make sense?
Great, thank you. So let's take another question from the audience then. Cody and Mr. Bass, Mr. Hoystad, we have a question here. I stayed in your for John and Glenwood Springs, I stayed in your town last summer and the hotel had a no pot sign at the front desk. How hard is it for your lodging and other tourist areas to control the use of cannabis? And what do you see as the effect on the area's tourism? And actually, I think this is more for Mr. Hoystad, and then if you would like to chime in, Mr. Bass, great.
Well, controlling the use of cannabis in hotel rooms, any public space, is more difficult than controlling the use of tobacco in a public space. In Glenwood Springs, we also have a recently adopted ordinance prohibiting the use of tobacco products in our downtown area. Unfortunately, you can eat marijuana and have potentially a more potent effect than you would from smoking it. And so, whereas whether a landlord or a hotel would like to prohibit the use of cannabis in their property, enforcement of that is quite difficult. And you aren't likely to get police involvement there. We have seen in some of our smaller municipalities especially, a small economic boon from marijuana tourism. Not so much in Glenwood Springs or further up the valley in Aspen, where the tourism industries were already quite strong. But we here in Glenwood Springs and some of our other municipalities further west have actually been the gateway to recreational marijuana coming out of Utah. And so we've seen a lot of people driving on I-70, which bisects almost all of the municipalities on this side of the state, stopping to get marijuana. For a long time, Glenwood Springs was the furthest west. Then it was Rifle, now Parachute, and DeBeck, other smaller towns. They have seen, because people leaving Colorado to go out to Utah, or Utah residents coming into Colorado to buy, have seen quite an economic benefit from the marijuana tourism industry. It has recently, in some of those communities, shifted the public perception. For example, in one small town of about 1,100 people, Parachute, Colorado, as late as last year, we had a recall petition against all members of the Board of Trustees because they had approved recreational sales of marijuana within the city. Now, because of the amount of sales tax revenue it generated, they are actually quite pleased with their industry and are looking to expand it as much as they can. In fact, I was told earlier today that that the town of Parachute will be on the Today Show tomorrow morning because they're opening the first drive-through marijuana shop. You're going to have to take drive-through to be to have a meaning that you don't quite understand it. They're going to have to drive into basically a garage with 2 doors. They'll have to close the doors. You can't see into the shop. They will sell to you as you sit in your car in a transaction that I imagine will take quite some time, and then open up and let you out. But it is its own form of tourism, and
Absolutely. Mr. Bass, do you want to contribute anything to the recreational side of the house?
Yeah, yeah. I believe that with, looking at 65% of the voters here voting for recreational cannabis, I believe that, everybody here in Tahoe, I think 65%, if not far more, has experienced, tried cannabis, or currently smokes cannabis. And I think it's the only responsible thing that we can do is to develop sensible regulations that will allow for it. And it actually has a huge impact on our tourism, and really with the direction that I think we're trying to move Tahoe, which is away from gambling and alcohol and coming to Tahoe and staying up till 4 in the morning and drinking liquor, to coming to Tahoe to go snowboarding, go mountain biking, and cannabis goes hands in hand with recreation. It gives you a great night's of sleep. You get to the top of the mountain, you smoke, you feel great. It's a very recreational oriented, herb, essentially. So we have to really, I think, take a look at the way that it will change our tourism and our visitors, and I think it's such a positive thing. And when you apply this to, kitchens that have cannabis-infused desserts, and there's many different ways, and without doing it, at Tahoe Wellness, I would say on the daily, and since Prop 64, we're talking probably 15 to 20 people a day that think that they can come to Tahoe Wellness and not have a recommendation because the law has passed and they can get cannabis, and we have to turn them away. And that's happened every day since we've opened, and we're turning them away. Well, where are they going when we turn them away? They're walking down the state line, they're trying to find a street dealer, and they're going and they're supporting a street dealer. So without allowing sensible regulations, without allowing these people, we're turning our visitors to our town to the street, and which can be a dangerous transaction, and it's fueling an underground market that, if with sensible regulations, these people would have a place to go and the city could even gain some tax.
I'm going to go ahead and tie on, one moment, Chief. I just want to tie on one question that we received from the audience along this line. Will you be able to serve both medicinal and recreational clients at your center if the city does allow recreational cannabis? And then we'll come back to you, Chief.
So that is kind of untold until the regulations are drafted. From what I've heard, there is a working on the state level to allow both under the same roof. Now, how we clarify a medical patient and how they're not going to pay the sales tax, because the way the laws are, no patient that is sick should ever pay for a medicine that is curing them, that is helping them heal, and that's across the board in tax code from federal through every state in the country. And I really believe that the 15% excise tax should not apply to somebody that is sick. And if you come spend 20 minutes at Tahoe Wellness, you will see somebody through the door that is ill to a point that they should not be paying the government a tax for what heals them. And so we have to try to bring them both together, but in Colorado, they've done it with the red card. So if you've got the medical card, you come through the same line and you get a tax exemption. And I really hope to see that here.
Okay. And I see, thank you.
I just wanted to clarify one thing real quick. With regard to Cody, I want to make sure that you're not giving bad advice to the public. Going to the mountaintop and smoking marijuana is not legal under Proposition 64. It's a public place, and you can't smoke your marijuana in public.
Jenna, just real quick, I think the gentleman from Colorado might be able to clarify. I was under the understanding that in Colorado, you have to have a wall between the medicinal side and the recreational side, and you can't sell it in the same business, but
Yes, Mr. Hoisted, and certainly Ms. Ajax, too, if you want to contribute any insight on this as well. Mr. Hoisted, what about this wall? The other wall.
Yeah, in Colorado, we have, like California, 2 different statutory regimens that are both regulated through our Marijuana Enforcement Division under the Department of Revenue. And they have very strict regulations as far as the division, both physically and by your products, between recreational and medicinal marijuana when they are co-located in the same storefront. And so what you'll see where there are both operations is a physical barrier. There's also very, maybe onerous is the right word, just very regimented tracking systems for the product. In fact, if you were a medical marijuana dispensary in Colorado and after 2012, 2013, you wanted to convert into a recreational only dispensary, you were allowed just a one-time conversion of your product because the product has to be tracked from cultivation all the way through final sale. And if all that isn't adding up, there are significant penalties that can come along with it. We've seen quite a lot of doors shuttered, and as you would expect, the more sophisticated businesses have started to put the smaller, less sophisticated and more penalized businesses, out of business. I guess you'd say that the cream has risen there, and we are seeing a better industry in our communities that is more responsible and no longer simply, the guy who thought that marijuana ought to be his passion starting a business, but true businessmen and women who see the importance of maintaining close community ties and the necessary physical and imagined barriers between both sides of the medical and recreational marijuana industries.
Absolutely, thank you. I'm gonna, in the interest of time, how's everybody doing? We're okay? All right. How's our panel doing? Doing all right? Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and merge a question from the audience and a question online. How can South Lake Tahoe keep cannabis storefronts and storefront advertising away from schools? And I think we talked about the limitations of not being by a school, but as well as keep products, edibles, with deceptive advertising away from youth. And I'm going to tag on a question that from our audience in that line. Is our town considering our children in all of this? The recent drugstore project survey, which was completed earlier this month, shows our 6th grade youth are very concerned with drugs in our community. So this is kind of a roundtable here.
On the advertising, the state has already put some things in place with regard to where advertising can take place. And Lori can probably talk better than I can to that. But as I recall, if that advertising medium was targeted, I think at I think a 70% number, is that correct? 71.6 towards youth, then you could not advertise on it. Yeah, I'm saying the inverse, yeah, okay. As far as the town goes, that's another good question that we don't know the answer to yet. Are we allowed to limit advertising in newspapers and radio? Obviously on the web, you really can't control that too much. And so that's another thing that we need to learn about. As far as the kids, yes, we're taking that into consideration. That's why we haven't formed any policy yet. We're all in the discovery mode. Again, 4 out of 5 council members are here to learn and to listen to you. And we will have workshops, and we will continue to listen to the citizens of the town. And I can guarantee you that the kids are the #1 concern for the majority of council.
So I actually want to piggyback on that Mayor Perfect statement. The children are probably the most important issue here. I think if anybody has any fears or concerns, it's about minors, right? Or young people using cannabis inappropriately. And while I see a lot of benefit in medicinal cannabis, I do think it's incumbent upon us to do really good education and guidance and make sure that children have a place to talk about this and understand it. And we do think about advertising and packaging, and we really put a lot of thought into it because children's brains don't start growing until they're about 25 to 27 years old. You are not done forming your cortex until you are approximately 27 years old. And heavy cannabis use in youth, or use inappropriately, can change the brain structure. We know that by studies. We don't know what it means long term, so that needs more study, okay? But if we want to keep our children safe, we need to learn how to guide them, educate them, and put things in place in this law and in our delivery systems that protect them. And in fact, I'm working with the local high school to start some offerings to have a physician available to them periodically to answer these questions, to talk to them about responsible use and understand what cannabis can do to a young body. So I think it's important.
Thank you.
And I would just, comment on that, that in a regulated market, I think it actually keeps the access to children much more regulated, and we actually have the ability to keep it in a place that we are checking an ID, we are making sure. I mean, I know that in high schools a lot of times these days, it's harder for kids to get alcohol than it is to get pharmaceuticals, or harder for them to get alcohol than it is for them to get cannabis on the street. And so if we can bring the majority of cannabis into a regulated environment, at that point, we're actually protecting the children much better. And on a second point, I've spent a lot of time in communities in Northern California where, kids are around cannabis their entire life. They grow up around it, they trim it from the time they're 3 years old. And most of those children actually engage in cannabis at a much different way than the children that are told that it's a scary, scary thing, and that they're basically told a lot of propaganda. Those children I've seen in my own lifetime really go more towards the drug because it's Pandora's box. They want to know. So I think it's being open with them and letting them know that it is an illegal thing. It is a very legal, open thing, and that's what it is. So that's my comments.
Thank you very much. Yes. I'm loving you guys. Ms. Ajax, we do want to follow up. I think this is a really relevant question. It seems like there's so much deliberation about, yes, no, which one. How is the state assisting local jurisdictions with this difficult decision?
Local control wasn't put on by the state. That was actually the Medical Cannabis Regulation and Safety Act. So the legislature passed for medical that there would be dual licensing. I came from alcohol. There isn't dual licensing. So you don't see very many industries where there is local control. Proposition 64 was also initiative, as you know, passed by the voter, and that also maintained local control. So like the Bureau and the state agencies, we didn't impose local control. So our role is to come out with good regulations, comprehensive regulations that are easy to understand, that cannabis, commercial cannabis owners can understand and follow, that is good for business, but also protects public safety, protects the patient, the consumer, the environment. And so that's what our role is. So a lot of this stuff, and I know the cities are going, well, when are your regulations going to come out? Well, the law keeps changing, and I think there's 40 bills currently pending at the legislature. So for us, it's very difficult to have adult use regulations when we have a budget trailer bill right now that is going to change AUMA, but we just don't know what that final is going to look like. So we're working literally night and day on the weekends to get these regulations, which is why we're going to come out with the medical regulation, because most of what a lot of what we're going to be asking people like Cody's business to do at the dispensary level, at the distributor level, is not going to change because it's between medical and adult use cannabis. A lot of those rules are going to be the same. And one thing I want to make sure is, as I think Cody mentioned earlier, the supply chain right now, the ownership requirement, it's different between the two laws. So we really want to get that aligned, because you don't want to have someone who wants to get a medical license and an adult use license, and there's two different sets of rules. So that's what we're doing. So our role is to educate the local jurisdiction, to tell them what our timelines are, what are we doing. I do a lot of outreach with League of Cities, California State Association of Counties, rural counties, to make sure they know what we're doing, they know what our timeline is, and to answer their questions on both sets of the law. So it's not our job to convince them to do one thing or another, because it is local control, but we are a resource for them. And that's one of the reasons I'm here tonight. It's good for you to hear what we're doing and to get everywhere, and so that's what we're doing right now.
Well, thank you. Well, we figured that we'd close our Q&A session with more of a call to action for our audience, and offer our panelists an opportunity to offer a 30 or 60-second call to action or closing statement on our next steps as a community. And if you would like to share that with our audience now, it would be my pleasure to, I could maybe start with you, Dr. Gerhard, if that's not too much pressure on you, and just go down the line.
I think everyone needs to get educated about cannabis. There are resources out there, lots of good resources. I provide resources to my patients when I educate them. And I think people who are even opposed to cannabis need to get more educated about it. And you need to be prepared for family members or children or grandchildren who you never suspected use cannabis. We estimate somewhere between 40 and 50% of the population in California uses cannabis on some, frequency. That's enormous. That is a large number of people. And so there are many people that are using cannabis around you that you probably don't suspect. And we all need to get more educated about it and really understand the nuances of it. And I really think that's the key to working all of these issues out.
Thank you.
So I would just encourage you to stay informed and be in touch with your local representative if you do live in El Dorado County and not the city. That, again, is Supervisor Novosel. I spoke with her today. She's very open and happy to speak with literally anyone, someone about this issue, to get your feedback, to take that back to this ad hoc committee. The county is interested in doing what's best for the community, what the community wants. We want to be safe about it. We're very interested in the revenue generation side of things also. And we are on a fact-finding mission. And so I'd encourage you to participate in that.
Thank you.
As a takeaway from tonight, I would hope that the audience recognizes that there are a lot of unknowns. Those unknowns are really the central point that I'd like to make. There's risks. There's risks to our tourist economy. There's risks to our children in our schools. And I think that we should take our time, be thoughtful in how we move forward as a community, and don't feel pressure to take decisive action on January of 2018. There's nothing wrong with waiting. And by waiting, I mean holding off on allowing some of those things we have control over until such time that we have better information from elsewhere. And lastly, I'd like to leave you with what has been decided by our city council and other community members with regard to our vision. The vision for the city of South Lake Tahoe is that we will reflect the national treasure in which we live. And I just ask you in your mind's eye, and if you have problems envisioning this, you can go to Google, type in marijuana user, and click the images tab. And you ask yourself as you look at that and see if that really reflects the national treasure in which we live.
Well, actually, let's go to Mr. Hoystad, and then over to you, Ms. Ajax. Thank you. And thank you to our city council members that are here too, by the way, and our city manager.
My advice would simply to be move forward with your eyes wide open and take a perhaps restrained and cautionary approach to your local regulation of this industry that even here in Colorado, we are still feeling out on a day-to-day basis. We have heard from a number of panelists that there are developmental side effects to the use of marijuana that we need to explore further as a society. There will be access control issues, and those will affect people down to your very youngest. But there are also potential for a more measured enforcement and some economic benefit to come along with this, especially, I think, in tourism-heavy areas like Tahoe. So use your land use controls and zoning to the best of in the best ways that you can envision and plan for. And as you see things that are benefiting or harming your local governments, adjust accordingly. Nothing has to be set in stone from the get-go, but there may be damage that cannot be undone if you don't take a measured approach.
So I will repeat, like I did earlier, please get involved in our regulatory process. Read our regulations, comment. The state of California has a wonderful process where you actually can make a difference. Get involved. I don't think it's just on the Bureau or just on the city or county to make sure we put together a regulatory program that's good for California. I think everybody has a chance to get involved. Get involved at the local level, the state level. There are a lot of pending legislation out there. Know what bills are out there. Look at that budget trailer bill and then weigh in with your local representatives, because I think if we all get involved, I think we can do this right. And that's really, at the end of the day, we have a statutory mandate to get this up and running next year, but we don't want to sacrifice quality. We want to have good regulations because we do want to protect those consumers, public safety. We want to make sure that our environment is protected, and I think it takes all of us to make it right. So thank you very much for having me here tonight.
Thank you.
So I think we're at a very exciting time, and locally here in Tahoe, the economic stimulus that can happen and the opportunities that can happen for so many individuals and families is unreal, and we really need to embrace it. But to do that, we do have to get active. We need to be at City Council. We need to be in touch with our council members to let them know that this is what we want. I really, really want to push hard to make a commission or something in town that we can work to see these licenses go to local people, and that we don't get hit by the huge corporate conglomerates of cannabis that are out there and that we know are going to be approaching our city when the doors open, and that's going to be a huge dynamic. So we've got to really study a way that we can make sure these licenses go to the people that come and live in Lake Tahoe. I think there's a huge, huge opportunity for everyone in here, and we really need to get involved. But one thing that we're going to do at Tahoe Wellness Co-op is to begin holding Cannabusiness series in the community center that is open to anybody. That'll teach you everything from regulations to how to get a license to how to form your entity, and to how to comply with the current laws. So please come check us out, and that's something that we can show to the city, is look how many of these local people really want to become involved. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
So I definitely agree with what the doctor said. Whether you're for the use of cannabis or against the use of cannabis, get informed. The state has passed the law, and possession and use of marijuana is perfectly legal. You can own up to an ounce. You can grow up to 6 plants in your house. And because of that, quite honestly, one thing the chief said I do agree with. There is no rush. We need to understand it because we can still use it. That's not stopping. The issue is the retail sales, the commercial grows, the testing, the edible production, and the details that go with all of that. And so what I would ask you to do is think about it. Do you want 20 retail stores down Highway 50? Where do you want them located? Where do you want a commercial grow allowed, if at all? Where do you want edible production, if allowed at all? Do you want a testing facility? Those are things that we would like to hear from you, because there's a big difference between having 1 or 2 retail storefronts selling recreational pot versus having 20 going up and down Highway 50. Think about the massage parlors. We've got tons of phone calls. We got 20 massage parlors on Highway 50. We don't like the look of them. Get rid of them. No one said they didn't like the service they provide. They said they don't want 20 Asian massage parlors down Highway 50. So the same question comes with cannabis. If the city does legalize it, how many? Cody's question about should locals be running it or should experienced operators be running it? That's another good question. Do you want people operating a business selling this particular substance who don't know anything about anything when it comes to selling it? Or do you want somebody bought in from the outside that has operated 5 or 6 of these stores? I'm not weighing in one way or the other. I'm just saying to you, we on council need to hear from you on all of these things. Same thing with the children. Do you want it here? Do you want it there? Do you want it 5 miles from schools, 2 miles from schools? There's a lot to think about. So I would encourage you to get involved, think about all of this, come to the community meetings and the workshops we're going to have and weigh in.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. What an excellent panel. And I want to thank our audience for being great as well. We received so many questions from you guys. Wow. here and online. And so what we're going to do, because we couldn't get to everything tonight, because everyone has to go home to their families, we are going to post these on our blog and post them to our panel via email for you to answer at your convenience in the next couple of weeks and few weeks. Get that up there? Great. And one common thread I'm hearing is that this is an opportunity for us, the community, to get engaged and get informed and really have this be an opportunity to connect with our local leadership. So consider TRIP at your service. If there is ever any feedback and an idea you have, if there's anything that we can do for you as a community organization, please connect with us. Email us at TahoeTryp, TahoeTryp@gmail.com. You can also check us out and get at us on Facebook, Tahoe Regional Young Professionals. And before we break, I just wanted to give an extra special thank you to the TRIP volunteers that made today possible. Our board members, can we see you guys? Our Civic Engagement Committee members, thank you. Thank you for this. And to all of you that made this a great event. I mean, if everyone could just take a moment and just turn around and look out at that lake. You know, this is why we're all here. And you know, together we can move forward. And again, TRIP is here to help with that. So thank you again, and we'll be in touch.